If listeners hadn't heard that intro and they hadn't worked with you before, what's the elevator pitch for Film Emporium?
Well, insurance brokers that tend to cater to independent filmmakers, students, what have you.
What types of coverage do we as industry professionals need for film and television?
Well, it depends on how much money you're working with, first of all. If you're kind of scraping the production together, you need whatever people tell you need. In order to get your locations and vendors and things like that. But if you've got a few $1 million, then you certainly should have a full package that covers, as much as can be covered under a policy like this.
Mhm.
The most basic coverage is general liability, right? That's the starting point that everything else gets added to. It protects you in the event that someone from the public were to get injured because of your activities, or if you were to damage property belonging to someone who's completely unaffiliated with the production, and then added to that, you have coverage for your rented gear. There's coverage for rented props, for vehicles, for damage to filming locations, which is not always covered under general liability. A lot of people think it is. There's a separate coverage for that called third party property damage, is really what you need if you wreck the place. Uh, then of course there's workers' comp if anyone on your cast or crew get injured. There's various coverages associated with reshoots, uh, faulty stock and negative. If something were to happen to your shot footage, or there was an equipment breakdown on set and you needed to go back and do additional filming, and, cast coverage, if something happens to someone who's integral to the project, it could be an actor or it could be a director or a DP or whoever. Those are the basics. There are several other similar types of coverage points that I could go through, but those are the big ones.
How does coverage change when you start getting into stunts and animals and special effects and working with minors?
Right. So the coverage itself doesn't really change so much as the underwriting process. They'll look a little closer if you've got hazardous activities, and a lot of times if you're working with a smaller budget and you would be looking to get a package that has the workers' comp wrapped up in it included, a lot of times they simply won't do that. If you have a few $1 million, again, you're using a payroll company and you've got the workers' comp that way. But yeah, they'll make you get that separately. That's the biggest hurdle I tend to run into when dealing with stunts.
What is something, let's say we do an entire comprehensive package with
Hmm.
you guys to cover every possible scenario, right?
Right.
What would still be some things that may not be covered that some filmmakers might assume would be?
Well, for one, weather. That's something I see a lot of. Weather insurance is an entirely separate policy. Usually it's too expensive and people don't buy it. I'll be honest with you. It could cost you, it's very specific to time and place. It could, depending on how you want the coverage to be triggered, eh, uh, you know, in terms of the amount of rainfall, it could run you 30 to 35% of your daily budget. It's really expensive. That's the biggest thing that wouldn't be included. There are other coverages that aren't included for, like travel accident. Usually you don't need that if unless you've got a union requirement for it. But there are plenty of websites you can just buy a travel accident policy. That's a
Okay, and we are recording. So there is one section that I would like to demystify for my audience, and that is errors and omissions insurance. What is it, and how do you guys work with that?
sure. Errors and omissions, that's not part of a production policy, right? That's something you purchase down the road, once filming is completed and you're ready for distribution. It protects you for the for claims due to the actual content of the project, right? For claims due to libel, misuse of intellectual property, invasion of privacy, things like that. When you're completed, you're going to get a distribution agreement, hopefully. And in that contract, there's usually a clause about errors and omissions coverage, and they're going to require it in most cases before they'll put your project out there. And usually it's a few $1,000s. A lot of people might think that it's part of a production policy, but it's not. Its own thing, and it's really important. We fortunately we don't see a ton of claims for that type of thing, but every now and again you thought it was an original idea, but somebody else had it first. Or especially with if you're using original music, that's a big one. That's probably the most litigious section of the entertainment industry is the music, because there are only so many beats and rhythms that exist, right? And you've got like a documentary that's in any way political. Those are often a challenge to place.
Do you see that do you start the conversation for errors and omissions insurance prior to production? Because I know most filmmakers think about it at the end when they get to the
No,
distribution contract.
no, I don't even bring it up unless they ask me about it usually, because it just kind of, it's like a conversation that doesn't need to be had yet. I mean, unless they have a financer that's requiring the coverage up front,
Mhm.
there's no point in starting down that road until you've got a contract for distribution, because presumably in that contract there's going to be specific requirements that the policy needs to meet, and we're not going to know that until you actually have the contract. One thing I should explain about this type of errors and omissions policy, the standard is to cover yourself for 3 years as opposed to 1 year. But, and this is because the assumption is you could get additional distribution contracts after that first year. So they keep the policy open so that you don't have to just, keep renewing it and keep buying new policies. The only reason you would need to renew it is if you thought you were going to get even more distribution contracts after that 3-year period you know but other than that, there's no need for that minor detail.
What are some of the things that insurance covers that filmmakers are never aware of?
Huh. Depending on the policy, sometimes maybe there'll be coverage for crew members' personal items, if they get stolen.
Is that
uh,
something that's separate from, like, mariner insurance if it's crew gear?
I think you mean inland marine
Yes, yes.
coverage, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So inland marine is just a general insurance term for property, right?
Mhm.
So there are a lot of different things that could potentially be covered under inland marine. There's the equipment, there's damage to filming locations, damage to rented vehicles, all of those reshoot coverages I was talking about, those all fall under the inland marine because, the film itself, I guess, is considered property.
How do deductibles and coverage limits affect the policyholder in real scenarios?
Well, that's the portion they gotta pay out of pocket, right? So, they're impacted financially. Yeah, but, they do that because, these insurance companies, they don't wanna be bothered with small claims, right? Insurance is really for more of a catastrophic type of loss.
When I know we were speaking before about weather,
Mhm.
and those sort of policies, but outside of that, what would qualify as like a covered interruption to a film production?
Well, if all of those reshoot coverages, all of those scenarios that I mentioned, like your gear breaks down in the middle of the shoot and you can't finish filming, So you need to reschedule all of that. That's a presumably a covered type of interruption. Or
Mhm.
if your lead actor gets hit by a bus, that's a covered interruption, you know?
Mhm. And what happens when we go over schedule or over budget due to that? Does coverage extend automatically?
Well, yeah. So if you were to have that type of situation, what would happen is the insurance company would look at your original budget and they would look at the new budget to complete filming, and then they would, indemnify you for the difference there, whatever your additional expenses are to finish the project.
Am I is an individual personally liable, or does the policy fully protect the person and the company and the producers?
Sure. Presuming the policy is under the production company name, then anyone that's working on the production is automatically included as an insured. Uh, for their liabilities. If they were to personally get sued while working on the production, presumably the policy would respond.
Have there been circumstances by which the producer or someone could be personally or was held personally liable?
Maybe. I don't really get involved with that end of it, as a
Okay.
broker. As a
Mhm.
broker, we're just responsible for we sell the policy, and then if something happens, we submit the info to the insurance company, and
Mhm.
then the insurance company will assign a claims adjuster, and the claims adjuster is really the one that handles the claim from that point. We don't really have any further involvement unless our client is having an issue and we need to get involved.
Okay. What can we as filmmakers do to proactively lower our premiums and avoid claims altogether?
I mean, as far as lowering premiums, there's really not much to be done. That they don't really factor in insurance history and good standard practice and things like that. Their pricing is primarily based on limits, budget, hazards, as far as limiting your exposure to make sure nothing happens where you need to submit a claim. I mean, you gotta do your diligence, follow all proper safety procedures, and hire people who know what they're doing, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and that comes with of knowing where the landmines are in film production,
Yeah.
which puts you in that category of being an experienced filmmaker.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so then I mean, and then it makes this question kind of obvious because you've kind of answered it already. But what do most of your experienced producers do differently that consistently results in fewer claims and just better outcomes in general?
I think one thing I could tell you that they don't do,
Mhm.
people who tend to see a lot of claims don't really keep their head in the game, so to speak. Like they'll leave a truck with several $100,000 worth of gear just parked and unguarded and left on the street, and somebody runs off with their whole truck with the gear. I mean, those are the kind of things that we see sometimes where people don't do what they should be doing.
And how do you guys underwrite production with like multiple jurisdictions and international travel and all that kind of stuff? Or do you do that?
Yeah, international sometimes can get a little bit tricky, mostly because of the limitation of what's available to most producers in the US and what's required overseas. For example, in the UK, they tend to want significantly higher limits on insurance than we're able to provide here on a foreign policy, especially considering the exchange rate and all of that. That's a little tricky. Sometimes security overseas can be an issue as far as getting the equipment covered. Sometimes where they're going can be an issue if there's any sort of travel advisory in place. Usually, a lot of times what I'll recommend to people is that, if it's a small shoot, maybe they just contract a local production company to run the production and have them handle all of the insurance needs overseas. Or if it's a larger production, I suggest they set up a local entity in that country and purchase insurance locally. It certainly makes things a lot easier and probably less expensive too, to be honest with you.
Well, this has been a very informative conversation, and I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. I want to be respectful of your time, and I know it's kind of cold out there.
Hmm. Yeah.
So wrap it up.
Hmm.
What advice would you give filmmakers who are now starting to make commercial films, music videos, etc., and seeking your company's support?
My advice is fill out an application.
And then you guys will take it from there.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right, great. Well, thank you for your time.
Sure, no problem.
Me and my audience truly appreciate it. Darren Henshaw of Film Emporium. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Bye-bye.